prosperity. And the single most damning statistic regarding the complete and total failure of the trickle-down economics of the last 3 administrations is that on January 3rd, 1998, Jim Ross Lightfoot, Jim Nagel, Jim Ross Lightfoot, Jim Leach, Jim Nussle, Dave Nagel, Neil Smith, and Fred Grandy represented Iowa in the U.S. House of Representatives. And on January 4th, 2013, we will only have 4 Iowans return to the U.S. House of Representatives. You have to understand that the loss of a congressional seat represents a shift of anywhere from 800,000 to 900,000 individuals, Americans. We're talking massive shifts. And when we look at our state, we see entire regions of our state in rapid decline, decay, and they're dying. Rural Iowa is dying. So we get artificial data. You know, Forbes magazine says, CNBC says. We hear candidates talk about their unemployment rates. Well, if you had 20 people that were in a community and 17 jobs in 1993, and then in 2013 you had 10 people in a community and 9 of them had jobs, let's say all 10 of them were employed. You could brag that you now have full 100% employment, but you lost half your population. So you know, there comes a point when we have to put into perspective what data really means. And the one piece of data that speaks to Iowa's economic condition more powerfully than any others is that we went from 6 people in the U.S. House of Representatives on January 3rd, 1993 to what will be only 4 on January 4th, 2013. It's devastating. So having addressed those 3 areas, the 4th minor area we addressed was health. But, you know, we basically, you know, health, the obesity costs the state about $3 billion a year. Our basic position was that we need to promote a healthy Iowa by example, not through government mandate. And so there really isn't a whole lot to talk about in that area. We do address the governmental apparatus of health care and our reforms. You can see that on our websites, but it just isn't the same conversation as those other 3. Having said that, on November 2nd, the pendulum swung again. Now, for those of you who somehow think that having Republicans in charge of state government is going to fix everything, let me remind you that Republicans controlled everything at the federal level not too long ago, and Republicans controlled the House and Senate less than a decade ago in Iowa. And we did not see Republicans fix welfare, fix justice, fix our courts, fix education, fix taxes. What we saw them do was basically line up with their hands out to lobbyists, just like Democrats have. The only significant difference between the Democrats and the Republicans is that the Democrats, when they controlled everything, raised our taxes and grew our government. And when Republicans controlled everything, they pretended to cut our taxes and still raise government. So we can't just sit back and say, yay, the Republicans won a return to fiscal soundness, because Republicans controlled everything not too long ago, and they didn't do much different than the Democrats. So if we're going to fix our state, Iowans must be educated, we must offer solutions, and we must hold these individuals accountable. So let's go over to the board, and I tell you, I learned something new about the board today, and it's so cool. I can just take and tap on one of these, and it'll come up and 2 days. And day one, I spent $50 for the room. And when I came down and paid the $50, you said, I appreciate your paying your bill on time, so I'm going to cut your bill the next day. And then the next day I got the bill and it was $55. Well, I would say, well, where did you cut? Okay? I'm not understanding. You know, now for the political class, when they use terms like cut, they really mean we're cutting the increase in the spending. And when they say they don't raise taxes, they usually are talking about, well, we're raising fees and other revenues that translate in the real world into tax increases. So I want to point you to this chart. Now the source of this chart was David Vaught, auditor of Iowa. He generated it in August of 2009. And he shows Iowa's growth in government contrasted against Iowa's stagnant population growth. Now here's the population of Iowa. And we have to understand that you know, if we disaggregate those numbers, in other words, if we break out the populations into separate groups, we have seen some populations increase. We're getting older, for example. We have a lot more illegals. We have a lot more urban refugees. What we're losing population in is our young people. We're losing population, for example, in areas where people are productive. Iowans, they're moving to states like South Dakota. What we also see, and if we look here, you know, basically we've got, you know, right here we've got the beginning of the Branstad era, and we see state government constantly rise until we get to the end. Now, these are the Vilsack years where he actually reduced, he actually didn't continue to increase spending, and then we get to the Culver years where he just, you know, basically strapped on the jetpack and, you know, hit the nitro button. Although we also see under the Vilsack years where he continually spent more revenue than he took in. And that's because he drained the surplus or the overtaxation Branstad left. Plus, he raided some funds like the Senior Living Trust Fund. But this is the kind of thing we can't have under a Branstad administration. Again, we can't have him constantly raising state government spending, talking about being, you know, the honest conservative. So what we call for is basically saying, okay, the state budget, and if you look under the state budget, you have all kind of different figures. So let's say, for the sake of argument, the state budget was capped at $6.2 billion at the end of this fiscal year. What we're saying is, what we want to see is where the budget, let's say the budget is here. I'll use this figure, $5 billion. It's not what it is, but what we want to see is this figure over the next 4 years doesn't increase, period. It's a static figure at best, or it declines. And that's what we mean in terms of a flexible freeze, that we freeze the budget at the current fiscal level, and then we take and we systematically reduce spending where we can in order to restore fiscal sanity to our state. Now, can I get back here? I lost my low, okay. Now this speaks to our second point. We don't just talk about a flexible freeze. Now, the one thing we're calling for is for the Branstad administration to resist simple or simplistic remedies. For example, he rightly criticized the Culver administration for an across-the-board cut. If you have to reduce spending in state government, you do it surgically. You either do it administratively or you call the legislature back and you reduce spending surgically. You do not treat the spork budget for, you know, banquets and picnics the same way you treat troopers. You don't cut across the board. You look at the budget and you say, well, we don't need sporks, we got to have troopers. And you fund troopers and you get rid of the sporks. You don't get rid of 10% of the sporks and 10% of the troopers. You don't do that. So, and that's